acknowledging
This was
acknowledging those.
recorded. That's why the link in the.
Yeah, great. Hello, everyone online. So acknowledging wherever you are who are joining us online, and paying my respects to elders past and present. As she said, I'm going to be talking about how to talk to your clients about philanthropy today. For those who were in the last presentation that I did last year, I gave quite a broad overview of the sector, and at the time what the impact of the COVID-19 epidemic had on the sector. So this time I'm going to drill a bit more down into philanthropy itself, and the different structures that you can talk to clients about, and also why you would talk to your clients about philanthropy. And I will say that I'll talk about the why quite a lot, because that does take some people a bit of getting used to, in terms of why is it an important part of your toolkit as an accountant, or we talk about professional advisors in all spectrums of it. It can help you to understand, the benefits for both business and values and relationships. So I will spend a bit of time on that. And then I will take questions at the end. So please have them ready. I really invite your comments and feedback and questions. So I'm going to share my screen now. So today I'm going to touch on a few things. I'm going to talk about how wealth in Australia is growing, and the opportunity that presents to talk to people about philanthropy and have that option. Why it's important to engage clients in conversations about giving from a number of different perspectives. Why your clients give, so just understanding their motivations and what they're hoping to achieve through giving. And then I'll drill down into a bit of technical stuff around the giving structures themselves and who uses them. I'll finish by talking about how you support your clients' giving, because the main message here is that you don't have to do it all yourself. There are different parts of, the giving puzzle that you can fit all together with people that you know and others that you trust. But the main message there, and I'll come back to it, is you as a central trusted advisor who holds that relationship over time. So let's get stuck in. In terms of what you'll come away with that kind of broad agenda, is a few skills to help you begin a conversation about giving, and also just some pointers to some further information if you want it. I'm going to give you quick and easy information of the core stuff that you need to know about the giving structures, and I'm going to give you some tools to help you talk to your clients about giving. So what does that look like? How could a conversation play out? How would you bring it up? What are some examples of the way that that's worked really well? And when we come back to the why, at the crux of it is that we all want to live in an Australia, or whether you're talking about international aid, where we're all contributing to these solutions, and our clients do too. So this is all about, what do they care about? Is it helping people who are homeless? Is it scholarships? Is it overseas aid? Whatever that may be, we can make a real difference here, and we can put a lot more money into the system to help Australians and anyone internationally in greatest need. So I'm going to give you also some context of what I'm talking about there, because Philanthropy Australia is the peak body for philanthropy, and we have been working really closely with the federal government on a plan to double giving in Australia by 2030. There's currently a Productivity Commission review of philanthropy going on that the Labor government promised before the election and then have now followed through with. And there will be legislative change, and this will affect you in terms of tax and all of that kind of stuff, which will enable more giving in Australia. So that's what we're really closely working on. And again, coming down to, we all want to create an Australia we all want to live in. So I wanted you to think a bit about this, and it'd be interesting, was she just in the room? Can I get a show of hands? And I can't see you. Oh no, I can kind of see you. Who's had a conversation with their client about giving? So 1, 2, I can't quite see. So if you have,
I can't see anyone raising their hands. I don't know if anyone online would have had. We've got 19 people at the moment.
thank you. So that's really interesting. And it's really interesting to think about why that is and kind of what have been the barriers to stop you, or you might not have even thought of it. You just might not even be on your radar. Or it might be there are some other things around feeling awkward about raising the subject, because it comes back to personal values and how you bring that up. It also might be around, if I'm not sure about how the structures work, maybe I won't bring it up. It might be around, well, I don't know if I want to have someone else involved in investment strategies for a corpus, all that kind of stuff. So there's lots of reasons that people don't talk to their clients about philanthropy, but there's a lot of really good reasons that you should. And we always think about, it's part of an advice toolkit, and it's part of a relationship with your client over time. So have a think about, what are your barriers? It's a bit different if you haven't spoken to your client about giving, but, where's the resistance in you and maybe in your client? So I'm going to show a video now, and it'll go through a few of the reasons why it can be really good for business, but also really good for your relationship. So it's only 3 minutes, but it'll give you it in a nutshell why it can be a good idea. So I'm just going to press play now.
Every day you provide guided advice to your clients. Including philanthropy in your advice toolkit is good for your client, but it is also good for you. And here are some of the reasons. Australia will shortly experience the largest intergenerational wealth transfer in its history. Over the next 2 decades, around $2.6 trillion is expected to pass to the next generation. Client retention is vital. In the US, just 38% of investors retain the same advisor when their spouse dies. And that number drops to 29% when both parents have passed and children inherit their assets. In the UK, over 90% of next-gens promptly change advisors when they receive their inheritances. Philanthropy can help move the dial on these sobering statistics, strengthening client relationships and providing that hook to the next generation. So what is philanthropy? Philanthropy is a voluntary donation of money, goods, or time to be utilised for the public good, sometimes called the 5 T's, that being time, talent, treasure, ties, and testimony. The government provides support for philanthropy by providing tax deductibility of donations. This can often be the segue to client engagement in charitable giving, especially when they are facing a large taxable transaction, such as the sale of a business or other capital asset. Tax planning generally should include charitable giving options. In an advice context, we are talking about structured philanthropy, which involves donating money via vehicle rather than ad hoc and direct giving. Philanthropic vehicles include private ancillary funds, public ancillary funds, and private foundations or charitable trusts. Structured giving formalises a client's charitable contributions to social, environmental, cultural, and community causes they connect with, and helps to create a holistic plan for the asset management over not just the client's lifetime, but with the next generation. You'll also find that discussing approaches to giving and who to give to helps prime family members for financial decision-making and positive engagement with you as a trusted family advisor. And last but not least, you can work with your clients to create an Australia we all want to live in. Philanthropy means your client can make a difference with their wealth in a way that is meaningful for them. Philanthropy Australia has set out a bold plan to double structured giving in Australia by 2030. Imagine $2.5 billion in additional funds available to our charities each year to help Australians in greatest need. You can be a part of the change we all want to see.
So, as you can see, there's a lot of reasons to talk to clients about philanthropy. And I will just stipulate here, we're talking to those who are in the higher net worth side of advice, especially when, accountants are talking to people about, if there's been a sale of an asset, or if they're coming to tax time and they want to give them the options to just make sure that they're coming out the best they can, you are kind of talking about that segment of the population. It is a segment of the population that's growing rapidly. We know that, in the 21-22 financial year, the top 50 philanthropists were donating about 1.1 billion. There's been a huge growth in wealth at the top end, billions of more dollars going to kind of a smaller amount of people. And we know that that presents an enormous potential for growing giving. That intergenerational transfer of wealth is massive in Australia. This is a graph in terms of what that will look like over time. But as an advisor, as an accountant, being able to hold on to those relationships over time, philanthropy can really help you to start those conversations and build those relationships while your current client is still living, and they might be talking about bequests or whatever. And then all the values conversations come up, and you can solve a lot if you started those conversations early. So this is the videos kind of talked about a lot of this. Philanthropy helps you to build trust and rapport. It can help you start those conversations about legacy, and you're talking to them about estate planning, ways of like tax deductibility at tax time, all of that kind of stuff. And it's just a good way to move into those conversations. We always say that the tax concessions aren't a primary motivator, but they are a start for a conversation. And in the end, if you're looking at structured giving, you're looking at more thoughtful and strategic philanthropy. So it's kind of that conversation around impact of how can you have the best impact. So you can have ad hoc donations, which just kind of, well, if they ask me, I'll give it. Whereas if you've got a structured giving vehicle, then you're a lot more thoughtful in the way that you give. So in terms of why your clients give, I touched on, of course, tax can be a start for that conversation, but there's a lot more reasons. A lot of it is around kind of legacy, responsibility, duty, that kind of stuff. A lot of it is around what they care about. Philanthropy Australia did some polling of the population earlier this year, and we looked at kind of why people engage in giving. And the three reasons are connection to a cause, connection to community, so what's around them, but also agency. They like to be able to make decisions about where their money goes. And we always say, you can say you can pay more tax, but then it kind of goes into this big government coffer, and you don't really have much control besides how you vote of where it goes. Whereas philanthropy gives you that real agency of putting your money into things that you really believe in. So this is kind of what this slide outlines. It's kind of sympathy. Do I care about the organisation? Some people will back people. Is it about, I've had a sickness in my family, and so I want to give back to that because, the medical team really helped me. Do I just think it's a good charity or a cause? So connection, community, and agency are the real big ones here. So there's questions about whether people should set up a structure and if they shouldn't. So some people shouldn't. Some people, ad hoc giving is fine. Maybe they don't have enough to set up a structure. Like, you don't want to set up a PAF with this tiny corpus, and then you're going through all of that governance, and you're not really giving much, and it's not really worth people's time. So we talk about, are they giving regularly? Is it sustained? Is it a substantial amount? Do they want to talk about tax deductibility? Because, for example, PAFs and PUAFs are extremely beneficial tax-wise because, you're not paying that, you're getting a tax deduction. Likewise with charitable trusts, the income tax, all that kind of stuff. So it can be a really good option for people. And do they want to be more strategic in their giving? So they want to think about it more. Do they want to involve their family? So if they're kind of ticking all those boxes, then it might be a good time to have that conversation with them. There are different ways of giving. So sure, you can just give to people because you see a need. If you give to individuals, you're not likely to get a tax deduction because they need DGR1 status. So DGR1 means that you get a tax deductibility on receipt of a donation. Ad hoc donations to DGR1 strategies are another way. So you might go to a fundraiser and you say, well, I'm going to give to the Children's Hospital and I'll get my tax deduction, and that's it for me, and that's fine. And then you start getting into more planned giving. So that's when you set up a structure like a private ancillary fund, a public ancillary fund, or a charitable trust. And of course, the other ways is a bequest in your will. So that might be to, someone who's DGR1 status. So there's all different ways that you can give, and they kind of range from not very structured to very structured. So the type of structure your client chooses will be influenced by all of these things. Definitely the level of wealth, how much have they got to get into it, and we'll discuss how each of the structures are good for different people. So a public ancillary fund, you could start with as little as $3,000, or you might do a giving circle, something like that, much less. Whereas if you're in a private ancillary fund, you need at least, we always say, about $1 million in that corpus, although the average is usually around $6 million or $7 million. A lot of it is how much time they want to give. So a public ancillary fund requires a lot of time in terms of governance and due diligence and all that kind of stuff about making decisions about where the money goes. You have to set up your trustees and all that kind of stuff. If you want to solicit donations from the public, so is it only your money going in or someone else's? And, if it's give while you live, or if it's you'd rather kind of give that money when you pass away. All of them offer tax incentives. So it's encouraged to grow this type of giving, and that's definitely what we're working with the Productivity Commission around, just to even make it more so. So I'll go through a few of these in detail, the three main ones that people do choose. A private ancillary fund is when you take at least $1 million and you put it into a corpus, and then you set up a granting program with your 5% distribution. You can give away more than 5%, but the minimum is 5%. Contributions to this are fully tax deductible. You can go with various options for who manages your public and private ancillary funds. So some trustee companies will do it. You've got operators like APS, they'll manage that for you. Or you can kind of manage it in-house. All I'll say with private ancillary funds is definitely make sure you're aware of the guidelines. So we have a guideline, the public ancillary fund guidelines, on our website. And there is a lot of governance to know what can you charge for, what can't you charge for, what's the role of trustees, all of that kind of stuff if you're going to manage it yourself, which a lot of accountants do. But there's a lot that you can run into if you do. So some people do go with the option of, you might bring the lawyers in, or you might think about the financial advisors in terms of the asset management, just to make sure that, in perpetuity over time, the corpus is still growing and therefore you've got something to give. So a public ancillary fund is one that a lot of people have a lot of questions about. We've got another one of those handy little animated videos on our website where we go through in detail what a public ancillary fund is. So it's a bigger fund, a bit like a private ancillary fund, except that it can take donations from the public. So that's the difference. A private ancillary fund cannot. And then people hold sub-funds within the larger structure. So if you think of community foundations, they're a really good example of people holding sub-funds. And the thing with a public ancillary fund is you're not worried about all that governance stuff of it. You can be involved in a due diligence of where you make recommendations of where your sub-fund money goes. So if you're like, well, I want that to go into the environment, or I really care about First Nations, you can make that recommendation, and then the public ancillary fund will do that for you. There's 4% that needs to be distributed per year for a public ancillary fund, and that's 4% of the whole corpus, not just the individual sub-funds. Much quicker to set up these ones. So with a private ancillary fund, you need a lot more time, so don't do it just like 2 days before end of financial year, whereas with a public ancillary fund you probably could. The other main difference, of course, is how much money needs to go into them to establish. So, Australian Communities Foundation in Melbourne, you can get a Gumnut account for $3,000. Usually it's around 20,000. So it's, however much you want to put in. So a private foundation or a charitable trust is established on the death of the founder. Again, there's a lot of governance involved in this. You need the board of trustees. You need to really think carefully about the deed and what the purpose of the fund is, because over time, that can change. So we know there are certain trusts in Australia that were established, 50 to 100 years ago, and times have changed since then, and it makes it really hard for the people managing them to bring it up with the times, So it's really good to work with lawyers, especially, to get that trust right. And this is where the communication with the next generation is so important, because if this has been set up and they haven't been told or engaged or whatever, and then they find out about it later, there can be disputes in wills and lots of mess. And, it brings you back to why philanthropy can be such a good tool to involve the family and start those conversations early. So you can imagine if the grandfather's coming in and, they're saying to the kids, our intention is to set up this will and this testimony trust. Do you want to come and tell us how you might interact with that? And, it's awkward conversations you can have early on and just get those dynamics. Again, this is quite a long one to set up, takes time. Usually you start with about 500,000 or $2 million around there. So I brought up trustees a couple of times, especially in relation to private ancillary funds and charitable trusts. It's really good to be familiar of what the role of the trustee is, especially as an accountant. When you're coming in, obviously you're managing the numbers around it, and a lot of the time you'll be on the trustee board doing that. And then you might want to think about, okay, well then, where does the investment conversation come in? Where is the governance and all that kind of stuff? So that the trustees need to ensure the deed is executed. And especially the private ancillary fund, you'll say, well, this is what it's for, and everything that the giving happens under that has to support what the fund is for. And that's a requirement by the ACNC. So that's what the trustees do. It's risk management, it's tax concessions. It might be around where the investment goes. So a lot of people have that conversation around, well, you don't want to invest in a gambling company when your philanthropy is addressing the problems of problem gambling, for example. So it's just having those align. But it's also around guidance and support of the giving itself. So for Philanthropy Australia, we're around more and better giving. Today, we're talking about getting more dollars in, but then it's also about, well, what does better giving for impact look like? So I brought this up before. You don't need to do it all yourself. It is a common misconception that you have to do all this stuff yourself, and different advisors are different. So accountants and lawyers and financial advisors will operate very differently. The central thing here is that if you're that central advisor that's helping and supporting a family, you can have the confidence to bring in others that can give the best service possible. So you're in there with the tax concession, you're managing that wealth, you're holding that space. And then it might be you're like, well, who's going to manage the assets for the corpus to make sure that it goes into perpetuity? And then, okay, who's going to help us set up the deed and, the way we're going to engage the family and the way that trustees and the governance around it works. There's also, with private public ancillary funds, others that manage those sub-funds really well. So APS has a really great fund, as do the community foundations, which are a really good way to kind of give where you live. But there's others like JBWare has a fund, I think Equity, like all of these different places. So it's just the partnerships that you choose to set up as a practitioner. So there's a lot of things around how I answer questions about who to give to. And I might start here around, okay, well, how am I starting these conversations around giving? So it might be that there is that tax liquidity event or whatever it is, and you've just got part of your business as usual. Okay, well, have you thought about philanthropy? What do you care about? What do you think your family cares about? What are these conversations? Do you ever think about that? And some people will be like, no, that's not for me, and that's fine. And you'll know your client, so you'll know probably if they're predisposed or not. Or it might be that they come to you and go, oh, I'm always getting asked for money, and I just feel really harried and I'm starting to hide or whatever. We've got lots of examples of that. If they set up a structure, it gives them a way to say no, but it also gives them a way to kind of focus on what they want to do. So that can make things a lot simpler and less stressful for people who are holders of wealth. But if you're going to support them, the best way to support them is by asking them more questions and finding out more about them. And again, this comes back to like a holistic advisor, someone who kind of knows their client really well and can support them in a lot of different ways. If it's a particular charity itself or a particular cause, the ACNC is a really good resource. Not only if they've got DGR status and they're on the ACNC register, there's a certain amount of due diligence done for you right there. You know that they've done everything they have in reporting, you know, they've got the right governance set up around them. So you know that you kind of can trust them, and then it just depends on how much people are giving. So if you're giving $10,000, you're going to ask less questions than if you're giving $1 million. And you're going to have a different relationship with people if you're giving those types. So it's just making sure that, you know, the questions are congruent with, you know, how much they're giving. The other one, of course, is to engage with organisations like Philanthropy Australia. We're the peak body. We do a lot of education around philanthropy and what good philanthropy looks like. We tell a lot of stories of giving. So we say, well, this is what good philanthropy could look like. This is who's doing what. So you've got that real kind of oversight of what's happening in the sector and who can be good to give to. But there are also organisations that specialise in philanthropy strategies. There's organisations, there's individuals, there's philanthropy advisors that know a lot, have been in the sector for a long time and can kind of support you. So that's all around Australia. We've got a list on our website of all of the people within our membership that can support in different areas of philanthropy. So that's a really good resource as well. The other way is that you can give yourself, if you do give yourself, if you are in a position to set up a structure of any kind, it's going to make it easier for you to talk to others about giving. I know for myself, we're not in a position to set up a private ancillary fund, but I'm part of a lot of giving circles. So I'm part of Groundswell because I care about the environment. I'm part of Impact 100, which is in my local community in Sydney's north. So there's a lot of different ways that you can just give a little bit, and then you'll be able to kind of talk within that, because you would have thought about what you care about, so you can talk to others as well. So as I mentioned, Philanthropy Australia would like to see giving double in Australia by 2030. So for us, it would be 2.5 billion more for people in greatest need. And whether you're funding here or overseas, you know, it's significant. I mentioned there's a productivity commission going on at the moment. For us, there's a lot of submissions that have been put in, but for us, it's around a policy environment. This is what will probably directly affect you when it all kind of plays out. It's about a culture. We talk about a national giving campaign, changing people's behaviour so that giving is more of kind of a forethought, and it's not just something that maybe we do when there's a bushfire or anything like that. It's much more part of what we do. But there has to be those strong foundations for giving as well. So, you know, for example, maybe having more charities that are DGR registered, for example. There's, you know, a lot of holes in the system. We just want to get. So advisors, accountants, lawyers, we're always saying we need you because you're kind of on the front line here in terms of talking to high net worth clients about how they manage their wealth. Again, I'll say it's not for everyone, but if you can open the door for them and then support them through, it'll probably be beneficial for both sides, but you're the one they trust. And so you're just a really important part of the puzzle. So I mentioned, just to finish up, we do have a number of resources that can support you. We have a professional advisor's guide to giving. So when we talk about professional advisors, we're talking about accountants, lawyers, and financial advisors, bankers, all of these people who support and just need to have this information. That's on our public website. And I will send this presentation around as well, and you can just click through. We have this online structured giving tool, which is a bit like a knowledge tree where you can say, okay, well, here's my type of client and what structure would work for them. It's not formal advice, as you probably know, but it will give you a start. There's also the trustee handbook for those who are members of Philanthropy Australia. That takes you through all of the details of the governance of these different paths. And every year we do a giving trends and opportunities report, which I actually went over with this group last year around, okay, well, how much are people giving? Where are they giving? you know, how much has been given through private ancillary funds, what are the funds under management, all that kind of stuff. So we're just about to release the 2023 one, but there is a 2022 one on our website. And finally, the most important thing here is news and stories. So the more stories, inspiration, you know, it's so good for the soul to read these stories. And we've actually just put out a publication of inspiring stories of giving. I will just add that there's an advisor page on our website that you'll find all of these, and they have these 3 really good little animated videos. The first one I've showed you, but the second one is just what are the public and what are the different types of structures and who uses them. And the third is like, well, how do you start this conversation with about giving, and just a few tips there. So that's it from me. I will stop sharing.
Thank you, Vicki. Thank you for your amazing presentation, as usual. I think it's been very informative, and everyone in the group would really benefit from it. Ian had a question. I was just wondering whether, Ian, you wanted to ask this question. Ian's online, or whether he still wants me to read it to you.
I can ask Ushi.
Thank you, Ian.
Vicki, I'm really from the other side of the equation, being CFO for a foundation and working with some other private charitable organisations. And one of the things I've run into is with foundations is trying to get a list of, or access to a good list of them, which then defines what they're interested in investing in, or providing or supporting, if you like. And I know that ACNC does give a list of foundations. It's not so definitive. What happens, a lot of people say, oh, look, the tax office actually manages this, but they're pretty private about that sort of information. So,
yeah, fantastic question, Ian. Thank you. We had a directory of funders for a while, which kind of outlined that. It was interesting seeing the engagement from our funders around that. Not everyone wants to be quite so visible, so it makes it really difficult for people in your situation and a lot of charities' situations to find who they need, and it does take a bit of research. There are a few lists around there, you know, they're not all that definitive, like no one's really cut through that. But what I would say is you can definitely start with the ACNC as you are. So, you know, like, well, who's funding in education, for example, and then who's funding in education in your state. But then it just requires a bit of research. And that's why Philanthropy Australia can come in, because you can kind of look in and say, well, you know, there's this story in Philanthropy Weekly which says that X foundation is funding here. And so you know that, okay, well, maybe I should look into them. And some foundations will want to be quite visible, and others will want to find people themselves. So they'll want to find the charities that align with them. And that's a bit like winning the lotto, when they kind of get in touch with you and say, you know, I'd love to be involved. But in terms of charities finding the funders, sometimes it happens through word of mouth, and you can use your board, for example. That's a really good way to do it. Other ways is just by knowing who's funding others in your space as well. So I often do that. I'll look at, like, okay, well, these hospitals there, who's funding them, and so we might want to engage with them. But yeah, sorry, that's not more helpful in terms of a definitive list, because they're quite hard to find. A lot of the other things that people do is they'll call on people who support philanthropy in that way. So they'll go to a consultant and say, well, can you work with me to find more funders in my area? So that's another really, like, Wendy Brooks and Partners is a really good example of that in Melbourne. And there's others that who provide that service. But in terms of a definitive list, not really, unfortunately.
okay. No, what it does is it would help save time, if you like, and effort, in that otherwise you're talking to a lot of philanthropists or foundations, and may have an interest in your area, or in a very general sense, but not in the specific area you're in, or such, and issues around that. So yeah, I mean, it's what you've said is exactly what I found, and I was just wanting to see if there was something I've missed or
Yeah,
some
no,
insight out
it's not
there.
something
So
you've
yeah, I've
missed
had
at all.
recommendations on people to talk to about who can assist with that process and things like that. So there's a lot of corporates with foundations and things. So
Yeah.
it really is just a matter of doing the hard yards. That's fine.
Yeah, and there's another way, like I don't know if you've there's an annual report that comes out every year that's done by Strive Philanthropy, and that outlines like all the corporates who are giving and where they're giving and what they're doing and how much they're giving. Philanthropy Australia had something similar of what we called foundation maps, and what we were asking the foundations to do was self-report on where they were giving. And so at first everyone was right on it, but then it tapered off in terms of people wanting to self-report. But again, if you know someone with a Philanthropy Australia membership and you can get through to foundation maps, that's often a really good place to start. I used to say to members when I was the state manager, it's all about the relationship and who you put it in a really lovely way in terms of what these foundations want to invest in. Foundation maps is a really good way to see what they're all investing in. But the Strive Philanthropy report every year is another really good place to start too. For corporate giving, that is.
Thank you very much.
No worries.
Thank you, Vicki. Do we have any more questions online for now? If not, I would take questions from the floor. No? Any questions from the floor? No? Nothing you have today? There's no question from the floor, Vicki. If there's none, I would actually ask a question. I know you've mentioned about good giving or good philanthropy. Is there something that really stood out to you in, say, the past year that you might want to talk about? And also, would there be a situation, which I presume there would be, where there's bad philanthropy or bad giving? And what do you think people should be avoiding to not end up in that latter situation?
What a great question. You can always talk about quote unquote bad giving as giving that doesn't listen. So if you go in or your client goes in with a set of requirements for what they think impact looks like, and they don't listen to the actual people on the ground who are delivering that impact, and sometimes the tail can wag the dog. So you'll have someone who's doing some great work and then a funder will come in and say, no, this is what good impact looks like and you have to fit into my version of that. And so then the not-for-profit changes everything they do to fit the funding. And that's not ideal, right? Because it takes them off their purpose. You're saying for any business, you stay on purpose and you stay with what you're good at. And if a funder comes in and seeks to kind of, it's not quite the right fit, but they kind of bend over backwards anyway, then that's not ideal. The other thing to really think about is there's two things I'll bring up. One is how much you're giving. So I mentioned this before. If you're going in and you're giving $5,000 and you're asking for a detailed acquittal report and you're asking to have all of this input, that's a bit outweighed. It's a bit out of balance in terms of from what you're giving. I mentioned, I'm part of a lot of giving circles and we give 1,000 here, 1,000 there, whatever it is. I would never go in and say, well, I want it done like this, If you're entering into or your client is entering into more of a partnership agreement for a larger amount of money, so you're talking, $500,000 or 100,000 or whatever that may be, then kind of incrementally that grows with the amount of money they're giving. You still want it to be a partnership. You don't want it to be, well, I'm giving you this much and therefore you have to do this, this and this. So again, that gets to like what not ideal giving is. So it's really important to think about the size of the gift and therefore how much you're involved as well. And, thinking about what's the client's, if they can go in there with their talent because they were a doctor and they did really well and now they're giving to the medical research, they might be able to give advice that's different. But if you have no idea about, the knowledge area of the solution you're trying to help, then maybe, it's not the best fit. You're coming in to give advice. The third one is around how people think about overheads. And I bring this up, I think I brought this up last year as well. We often think that we want all of our charitable dollars to go to the cause. And there's a lot in the media around how, you've got dodgy charities and it's all going to overheads and it's all, how much they pay their CEOs or whatever. I would just encourage you to really think carefully about that. Because I always think about, you'd never run your business where you don't properly resource good people, leadership, development, a nice place to work that enhances creativity, good back-end function, good technology behind you. You would never say to Apple, when I buy your phone, I want to make sure that I'm not just paying for the phone. Like, I only just want to pay for the phone. I don't want to pay for the research and development that's gone behind making the phone. I don't want to pay for the office where, the factory where the phone was built. I don't want to pay for any of that. I just want to pay for the phone. It doesn't make good business sense. And actually, within a charity, it doesn't make for good impact. We've got a lot of figures that say, low overheads does not equate to good impact. You can see the numbers around it. We call it pay what it takes. And that's an argument you get in government and you get in philanthropy. So I just encourage you to learn a bit more about that and think, if I'm really resourcing a not-for-profit to do good work, what does that look like? And it doesn't look like only having volunteers and people working heaps of hours on no pay. Excuse me. Or never having actual time to think about, business planning and having good people and all that kind of stuff. It's not what good impact looks like in any way. So we've done a lot of work around pay what it takes and really having that good relationship with your people, because we always say, find a good organisation that's doing good work with good people and back them, and then just step back and let them do their work and get to know them, but back off and just they know what they're doing.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds good. And I agree. I agree about, your comments about the overheads. I think there is this misconception that, if we are spending on admin and fundraising, they're actually not doing the right thing, which is not necessarily true. And they need it to run an organization. Sure.
Yeah, absolutely. And we've actually done the sums, and there's a report on our website called Pay What It Takes, and it's 30% overheads is usually it's kind of consistent across the UK, the US and Australia.
Yeah.
Thank you for that question.
Yeah. And I think what people don't realize also is, how do you measure, overhead and admin costs over time when the impact actually is over time, and how do you,
Yeah, and it might be that you don't focus on that. You think, is this organisation doing really good work and making an impact?
Yeah.
What do they need to do that? How do I fund their capacity to do that? And then you kind of stop there.
That's right.
But it depends on your relationship. You've got to know them really well to have that relationship and trust. And it just takes time. Yeah.
That's right. Yeah. Any more questions from the floor? Anyone else? Yeah, Hendrik.
Thank you, Sian. Thank you, Vicki, for the wonderful presentation. I actually volunteer as a treasurer for a quite small charity in Australia. We are the DGR registered with ACNC. My question is probably related to your comments earlier. Whilst our donations not big, we do have 2 large donators, which probably about 30% of all total donation comes from these 2 people. And these 2 people that want to actually steer the directions of the charity. My question is probably more, what's your advice here, especially to accountants like myself, on how can I approach these donators to say, hang on, let the charity runs itself, and good giving is good giving, but the charity also has the purpose and the goal. So do you have any advice to approach this situation? Thanks.
Thank you for that question. It's such a hard one, isn't it? Like, it happens so much. when people would just come in and just feel like they've got that power. I mean, I think the main thing is to stay strong in terms of your conviction and how you do things, and always have that reason around, okay, we do it like this because of this. And if you have a really strong strategic plan and a really strong strategy for how you're going to get to your impact, and whoever is the CEO, you know, if it's a really small organization, I assume that they'd be kind of managing that relationship, and it really is up to them to have kind of a mature and balanced conversation with them. And it might be that you're coming in and you're saying, well, here's my strategy, this is how we're going to do it, we really believe in this, you know, the numbers support this approach, you know, we hear what you want to do, maybe we can incorporate A, B and C because there might be some good things amongst that, but really can we reset the relationship? And I don't know how long the relationship's gone for, and you have to be careful there. You don't want to lose them, but on the same account, like, you want to make sure you've got people who are the right fit for you. And I think the issue that comes up with charities is you're so desperate for that money because it's so fast, you know, you can't find it. And if you find good beneficiary, you know, people who will give you a good chunk of your income, you don't want to lose them. But at the same time, you don't want someone who's not aligned with you properly. So one of the answers might be that you look to diversify who's giving to you and find other major donors. If you don't see a pathway where that can work and they just won't come on board and they're just really stubborn and they're like, no, you need to do it like this, then in the background, maybe you need to be looking for people who are a bit more aligned. Does that answer your question okay? Cool.
Thank you, Vicki. Still no question from the room? No. We have a very quiet audience today. I guess it's Melbourne Cup today. That's why.
You're just waiting for your Melbourne Cup lunch. You're like, come on.
Yeah, we want to go to Melbourne Cup lunch. Ian's there? Yes, Ian.
Yeah, look, I'd like to thank Vicki very much, actually, Lucy, and you'll probably do the same again, because very, very sound advice from what I've heard in respect to the responses to the question there and things of that nature. I completely agree with your view on the issue of back support, the administrative support costs and things like that. I work with some charities. We try and get it quite a lot lower than that, but we have some reasons why we can do that style of number, which are fairly unique. But it's a real challenge, and I'll probably follow up. I'll chase up Philanthropy Australia. I might try and follow you up later, just to be a contact. I'd be really intrigued just to have a look at a few of those follow-on questions that might come up. Thank you very much.
No problem.
Really appreciate it.
Yeah, and I will just say, just to caveat that, there's never a one size that fits all. So you might be able to get people, you know, the way a organisation set up, it might be, you know, economies of scale might be really differently to others. So it's not always going to be 30. Sometimes it is a bit less, but it's just got to be accounted for. So yeah, it's always a challenge. And there is a big pay what it takes report on our website, and you just really, really welcome to get in touch. What I will finish with, if you want to know more, we do have a lot on our public website. We also have a LinkedIn group for professional advisors. So that's, you know, we give tips, we invite others to give advice. We've got a lot of really experienced people in the sector that will lend their expertise to that group. Please feel free to get in touch if you've got any questions or you'd just like to learn more. We really welcome it. For us, we really just want to grow giving. Like, we want more advisors talking to their clients about philanthropy, just opening it up for those that it would be a good fit with. Really welcome to get in touch.
One last question to you, Vicki. How achievable do you see it is to be able to reach that $5 billion figure in 2030? Yeah.
You always got to have a goal.
Okay.
And so that's, and there are actually some ways that could supercharge that, right? So a lot of it is around just getting more people to give, but there's also some ways around, for example, if you gave a little nudge in your tax return. So if, say you got a really good tax return and there just could be like a little option that says, you know, do you want to give some of this to charity? One of the big ones we're talking about is being able to donate via request through your super. So you're seeing this big intergenerational transfer of wealth. A lot of people are dying with a lot of super and they're not spending it. They might, you know, think they need it, but then they don't. And then what happens is that they just bequeath it to the next generation, which just kind of means that the money is just staying in the same families, right? Yeah. And at the moment, if you wanted to do it, you'd have to put it into an estate and then it would bequeath and you'd have a 30% tax tax outcomes. You pay 30% tax. What we want is for it to be more simpler. So basically, if you know, you could go to your superannuation and you could say, you know, when I die, I want a certain percentage of my super to go to, I don't know, X charity. And then it just goes straight from your super into that charity without having to go into an estate through a will process. If you did that, you could double giving on its own. The other thing is around a national giving campaign, really changing the culture in Australia. Like a lot of people say, why aren't we more like America where they give a lot or, you know, they're giving a lot in New Zealand? Like what's
Vicki,
going on? Yeah.
I don't know,
Have
you
you
went
lost me?
offline here. Okay.